Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time on this, what is becoming in the UK almost like an autumnal evening, because the nights seem to be getting a bit darker. The temperature's definitely dropped. It's 11 degrees today Celsius, and I am on the verge of getting my cold plunge back out for the winter. So it's definitely getting there. Thank you for joining. So today's topic of this webinar is going to be absolutely epic. I know that everybody's interested in generative AI. Very likely that everyone tuning in today is interested in generative AI because that's what this webinar is about. So if you're not interested in generative AI, what are you doing here? But the thing about generative AI is that the technology can be applied in so many different areas, so many different ways, that for many businesses, the challenges that they face is actually it's very difficult to find and settle on a use case. What do I actually use it for? It's very difficult for them to understand the cost of running a Gen AI service because different APIs and different model providers have different types of costs and stuff like that. And you might use one API to one model 5 times in one interaction. And so what happens to the costs of that when you start scaling usage across hundreds of thousands of users? Getting out of the pilot phase is another challenge. These are all things that McKinsey, a report from McKinsey has highlighted. And I know that Vaibhav, you're going to cover a lot of this stuff from your research as well, which is very much the same sort of stuff, which is the top challenges businesses face. Getting out of pilots is another one. Getting from pilot to production is huge. And something very topical that many people may be facing is also getting organizational support, because there's been a lot of companies I've been speaking with recently who are working on things like AI policies and stuff like that. And there's the risk team, the compliance team, the legal team. Everyone's really seemingly, not entirely confident about moving forward with generative AI. And so there's some blockers and barriers that our enterprises are facing when it comes to getting some of this stuff off the ground. So today, we are going to get into all of that. We're going to cover, Vaibhav's going to do an excellent job of showing some of the Everest research that's been done recently in terms of the trends, where we are with the landscape, what kind of use cases are gaining traction, how are organizations approaching measuring ROI, things like that. And then Merle from Kore.ai is going to show us a new platform. Actually, it's an entirely new platform from Kore.ai, which is a generative AI application builder called GALE. And within that platform, you are able to build things that you wouldn't have previously been able to imagine without generative AI. I'm not going to give too much more away because Murray's going to do a great job of showing us that. So as we kick off, and before we kick off rather, if you've got any questions, please do use the Q&A feature at the bottom there, because it's quite a challenge to keep on top of what's going on in the chat. So if anyone does have any questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll do our very best to put them to the guys as we go through. If not, we'll save them till the end. And we're going to run polls and stuff like that, so please do participate in the polls. This will be recorded and is being recorded. And so if you don't or if you recommend this to a colleague, rather, which I recommend you do, then the link to the recording will be sent out tomorrow morning, because a lot of people tend to ask about that. All right, so let's kick off then. Let's do some intros, shall we? Merle, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us, and thanks for a whole lot of people who joined across the world. My name is Murli Raghuram. I am part of Kore.ai. We have been in a conversational AI company for a long time, and now obviously playing around with GenAI. I head their product, the brand new product that we brought to life about a couple of months ago called GALE. So delighted to be here, delighted to share our thoughts, delighted to share our product, and looking forward to the questions you guys may have, and more importantly, to see what kind of things that you guys are building alongside. And I'm hoping those questions kind of ponder us to think about new capabilities that we have to build and bring that to life within our products. So delighted. Thank you, Kane.
Thank you, Merle. Appreciate it. And Vaibhav, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kane. Again, thanks for inviting me, and welcome everyone who's joined the webinar. So introducing myself, I'm Vaibhav Bansal, working as a vice president with Everest Group. Talking a bit about Everest Group, it's a research based organization where we dive deep into multiple areas. I especially am focused on automation and AI. Again, both on the research side as well as custom advisory, we provide to many practitioners in the space. So that's about my role. Really looking forward to sharing what our research says about the advances which have been made in this space, and hearing from all of you. Thanks.
Likewise. Thank you. Very, very much excited to hear from it. Hold on a minute. I was just going to launch a poll there, but I've launched the wrong poll. Let me launch the right poll. Give me a sec. So we have a poll here. which I would love your participation in because it helps us tailor this webinar to your needs, essentially. So this poll has got two questions. And the first question is, what is your experience level with deploying large language models and generative AI? The options are never touched it before, got minor experience, so I've played around a little bit, moderately experienced, so you've maybe done some experiments, you maybe have some things in production, experienced, so you've deployed multiple generative applications to production, or advanced, been working on production generative AI stuff for years. And question number two, what are your greatest concerns when it comes to deploying LLMs and generative AI? Is it data privacy and security, accuracy and reliability, user acceptance and trust, ethics and bias, compatibility with existing tech, cost, or operational maintenance? Please do have a little bit of a flutter on that, and we'll have a look at the results. What do you reckon, guys? What do you think people's general experiences with generative AI and large language models deploying it from your experience?
Using it for years. Just
Yeah.
kidding. I think based on what we have seen is people have started to play around, especially in the enterprises for the last year or so. They've definitely been in the POC stages. Very little in production, for sure, because of many reasons that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I think everybody definitely have played around with GenAI. My 20-year-old daughter uses ChatGPT and Anthropic Claude, so I'm assuming it's a general accepted criteria now.
Nice. Did you concur with that, Vaibhav?
Yeah, I would expect most responses, in the second or the third bucket, but we'll be happy to get a surprise, if there are more people who are actually experienced in this area.
Nice. So we've got nearly 75% of people have voted. Let's end it there because we'll move on in a second. So 33% of people have minor experience, so they've played around. 37% have been doing moderately experienced, been doing some experimenting, and some stuff is in production. Only 10% have classified themselves as experienced, deployed multiple generative applications. 18% have never touched it before, and 1%, probably just one person, is advanced, been working on production generative AI stuff for years. Shout out to you. On the second question, the biggest kind of concern for people is accuracy and reliability. 80% of people. Well, I don't think that's a surprise. Data privacy and security, 66%. And following that is cost at 52%. So hopefully, Vaibhav, that gives you a little bit of context of where people are at as we go into your presentation.
Sure. No, makes a lot of sense, and I think, Ken, like you said, very synonymous with what we're noticing across the board. So, thoughts shared by this book.
Nice. Cool. All right, let's move on then. Let's have a look at the lay of the land then, shall we? Do you want to share some of your research then, Vaibhav, in terms of what Everest Group has been learning from the research you've been doing? I know you've been speaking to lots of companies, lots of organizations looking at and deploying generative AI, and so I'm sure we're all interested to learn a little bit about the kind of trends you're seeing and what's happening out there.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Okay, so I'll just share some of our research insights in a short presentation, and here is how it will look like, right? So we'll talk a bit about what has been the GenAI story so far, all the hype and what has it led to. Then most importantly, what kind of impact is expected, and today, what kind of use cases are really emerging, which are the high potential use cases which enterprises are already working on, and the second part of it, right? How do you measure the value out of GenAI? What are some of those KPIs or metrics which really can be used to measure this value? Then we'll talk a bit about what's the current reality. Is the hype really worth it? Has it lived up to its hype, or are there certain challenges like the ones many of you talked about which still need to be overcome? And if yes, then how do you actually overcome those challenges? What are some of the future trends we are seeing in this space, and what do they mean for all of us? Yeah, so that's the shortest stuff. So we'll quickly get started. So if I have to really summarize the GenAI story or the hype of the last 1.5 years, this is a meme which I like, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, right? So basically, in the last 1.5 years, what we've seen is, if you have to sell anything, include GenAI, and there's a very strong likelihood, it will get sold. And that has been largely the case, at least till recent past. If I have to, go slightly into, the history and look at the timeline, from where it all started. Of course, large language models have been there for some years, right? Way before ChatGPT, came into picture. But again, it was not popular, it was not democratized, and that's what ChatGPT did. It took this entire technology to the consumers, to the end users, and that's the reason for such a rapid, wide-scale adoption. So it became the fastest application to reach 1 million users just within 5 days. And after that, I think it triggered an entire wave of GenAI, where you had big investments coming from Microsoft into OpenAI. There were announcements made by providers like NVIDIA, which really help you build, refine, and upgrade models. At the same time, we had, at least in the early stages, a lot of incidents which were around data leakages. I think Samsung was the most prominent one, where they actually banned their employees from using GenAI. As we moved further into the second half of 2023, a lot of other providers started catching up. So we had Meta coming up with Llama, we had Google coming up with its Gemini series. We had again big investments coming from Amazon in terms of models, or say even from the chip companies like AMD, Microsoft, Intel, etc. Who provided some sort of competition to NVIDIA, right? So those were the developments which happened last year. Of course, apart from a lot of experimentation, right, which was done by enterprises using whatever technology has been available at different points of time. And then we get into 2024, right? So where you had big investments from Amazon and Google into their data centers. A very important development was the passing of EU AI Act, which is actually meant to be a governing framework for AI and Gen AI, especially in Europe, but it will have implications on such regulations in other geographies as well. Among all this, right? So I think one company which really gained, right, which was like the shovel provider in this entire gold rush, right? So that was NVIDIA, right? So which actually tripled its market cap in just 1 year. So that's the story, right? Till now.
Nice.
Now today, right where we are, GenAI has really become embedded into popular consciousness. When it comes to enterprises, today it's actually among the top 5 investment areas as far as digital or next gen technologies are concerned. And this is some data or insight from the key issue study which we do every year. So last year, of course, GenAI was nowhere in picture. This year, it's already featuring in top 5, and you never know, it might move further maybe in the following year. So that's about the hype, which has been there so far. And again, it hasn't been without a reason. The potential of the technology has really been immense. It's just that maybe its realization may take some time. Okay, so let's see what kind of use cases and what kind of value can be generated out of GenAI. This is just a picture of key process areas or functions across business processes and IT areas, and where could actually Gen AI or where is Gen AI actually playing a bigger role. What you see on the x-axis is ease of adoption, like how easy it is to adopt Gen AI in a particular function. Is that function really governed by regulations? Is the data very sensitive? Is it really critical for the end customer, right? So those are the considerations here. And on the y-axis, you have potential, which measures how amenable the technology is for that particular area. If you look at this, especially the top right quadrant, right? So there are certain areas which emerge as good candidates for GenAI. If I have to talk about business process areas, right? Customer experience management, or CXM, marketing, sales, trust and safety, even HR to a good extent, right? So these are all areas which are strong candidates, where we also see a lot of good use cases emerging and some early adoption happening. Okay. Similarly, on the IT side, right? So anything to do with software development or testing and quality assurance, right? So that's where we are seeing a lot of progress. even managed services or IT operations or service delivery, right? Stuff like ticket resolution, all those use cases are moving ahead in terms of adoption.
What would be an
Uh,
example? Sorry
yeah,
there, but what would be an
yeah, go ahead.
example
Sorry.
of the trust and safety type of use cases? Are you talking there around kind of like governance and compliance and things like that? What would be an example of the trust and safety area?
Yeah, no, you're right, exactly. So governance and compliance, in fact, this is an area where actually it's working both ways, right? So GenAI is actually helping with better trust and safety practices within organizations, right, in terms of better compliance, with existing regulations, even in terms of, compliance within the entire IT landscape. Uh, uh, so that's an important area. Even, I mean, if I talk about some adjacent areas, like say marketing, right? So if you have to talk about promotions or recommendations, right? So those are the cases where GenAI is really finding a lot of adoption.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, so that's
great.
what I can say. And again, I'm getting into a bit more detail on specific use cases, right? So, for example, in terms of process areas, right? If I talk about customer service, uh, this is in fact an area where I would say the most amount of disruption has happened with the advent of Gen AI, right? So if you talk about the pre-Gen AI area, right? So there was a lot of disappointment around chatbots or conversational AI or customer service, right? So most of the chatbots were very transactional, tree-based conversations which used to happen. But with Gen AI coming into picture, the landscape has completely changed. Similarly, you could use, Gen AI for generating customer journey maps or process maps or workflows. So a lot of other applications. Sales and marketing, I touched upon, but apart from personalized recommendations, you could actually use it for a lot of cross-selling and upselling as well. Again, I talked a bit about software development. Let me take another one, HR, right? So HR is an area also where we see a significant disruption. Today, GenAI is being used across enterprises, right from, say, recruitment to acquiring new talent to employee onboarding to managing their entire learning lifecycle. Say, especially in recruitment, right? So right from resume screening to even interviews, right? So we see that happening through Gen AI, and like we are not far from that stage where 70-80% of this entire work is actually done using Gen AI.
Mm. And is that, for example, the screening that would be something like, because we recently advertised for a project manager and we got 220 or 250 applications, which is like
Mm-hmm.
far too much for anyone to just sit down and go through in any short period of time. Which what would have been great is if I could just say, right, here's 300 CVs, throw that
Yeah.
to a model and say, here's the job description, and these are the criteria. Surface to me the top 10% of this that match that. Are those the kind of examples that you're referring to there?
Yeah, those are the kind of examples, and I'm of course I'm talking about maybe keyword based search, finding better applications as compared to others, which sometimes just doing it through manual effort or humans is not that efficient. In fact, many studies with different enterprises have shown that today we are at a level where the kind of effectiveness which comes through Gen AI, say in the recruitment process, is actually at par or even above par in many cases with what humans can do.
Mm,
Right?
nice.
I mean, resume screening is in fact a kind of a very done and dusted thing, but I'm even talking about more advanced steps, like say doing at least some initial rounds of interviews, right, or maybe some chatbot-based, conversations, right? So those are the kind of use cases which are also very prevalent.
Mm, brilliant.
Okay. Talking a bit about industries, so typically when it comes to adoption of digital technologies or automation and AI, there are certain industries which have always been ahead, and that includes banking, insurance, healthcare, and life sciences. So it's no different for Gen AI. Right. So, for example, for banking, right, fraud detection or is coming up as a good use case. I mean, it may not, at least at this stage, GenAI may not just directly detect frauds, but at least it enables you with a lot of data and insights, which can then be used to, identify frauds with some human in the loop. Similarly, banking, healthcare are industries, where the data is either very confidential or at times it can't be really shared across the board, right? So importance of synthetic data becomes important. So that's where GenAI is helping immensely. In healthcare or life sciences, right, especially use cases around drug discovery, pharmacovigilance, or diagnostics, they are finding a lot of traction. Uh, uh, so that's on the healthcare side. Uh, Across the board, you will see use cases related to personalization or recommendations. Some of that was happening even before GenAI came into picture, but I think all of these have become better, more accurate, more efficient with the advent of GenAI.
Mm.
I mean, a couple of use cases I was amused with, was say game development, right? So you could actually, simulate some of those experiences, and you can actually feed that into the game development process, or training of autonomous vehicles, right? So, and I think we've all heard of the self-driven cars, which might become a reality soon. But any sort of training which happens on the vehicles, or basically images and all of that, right? So they get generated with help of GenAI, or the training could happen with the help of GenAI without the need of a lot of data.
Got a question here from Alex, which is pertinent to the healthcare use cases. So Alex mentions drug discovery is an interesting one because the successes for this in a regulated process can take up to a decade to take advantage of GenAI. Are you seeing faster ROI or faster clinical results as a result of GenAI, or are they still bound by the typical timelines that it takes to bring new drugs and new things to market in that area?
No, in fact, that's what I would say is the biggest benefit, right? So faster time to launch these drugs, and faster approval and the entire regulatory cycle which is associated with drug discovery. You can do a large part of the clinical trials process through simulations and without essentially the need of human subjects at different points of time. So the entire clinical trial and drug discovery process accelerates. In many cases, we've heard at least like a 2x or a 3x kind of a change in the time to launch the drug.
And so looking back at the polls, 50% of people that voted on the polls said that they've either never touched generative AI before, or they've got minor experience and playing around. Sometimes that'll be either they're in the open AI playground and they're doing some testing, or maybe that they're just experimenting with ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. From the research that you've been doing and the use cases that you're looking at, what's the most typical way that businesses are approaching using generative AI in these scenarios? Because on the one side, you've got using an enterprise version of ChatGPT Team. On the other side, you've got building their own enterprise applications using software similar to Core, and using all different types of models and fine tuning their own models and stuff like that. Where do you see these use cases arriving from? Is it across the spectrum? Most experimenting initially with something like ChatGPT, a productized product, or most kind of building their own bespoke applications?
Yeah, so I think, of course, it all started with connecting to these proprietary LLMs like the OpenAI's GPT models, to, for example, Azure OpenAI connector, right? So that's probably the first thing which everyone did. But that's something which already happened like last year, right? So of course, things have moved a lot since then. Uh, so today, in fact, after that, I think the next set of use cases which were taken up, by enterprises were, I would say, relatively lower risk use cases, right? So which didn't have an impact on the end customer. So they were more of, back office or mid office kind of processes, and that's why you saw emergence of, co-pilots or agent assists and those kind of solutions, right? So which actually help your employees or your developers or your agents do their tasks better, more efficiently, and so they are support system for them, but they are not essentially passing on outputs directly to the end customer, right? So that's what has transpired over the last few months, and probably those are the ones which are already in production. Now, I think in the recent months, we are seeing emergence of newer use cases where there could be certain things which are even going to the end customer or with some human intervention, right? So we are moving slowly towards the front end processes, but they are still very limited, right? So that's the evolution. In terms of technology, of course, bringing your own models or doing it, in your own premises can be really costly, especially for mid to small size enterprises. So largely, I think, uh, maybe some GenAI platforms or basically doing it, on public cloud or those kind of constructs have been more helpful rather than, making big investments into your own infrastructure and trying to do everything on your own. At the same time, of course, providers have been coming up with their own, models and LLMs or even smaller language models to solve for some of these enterprise needs.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's what I see happening. Kane, did that answer your question, or
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, we've got some other questions coming, but we'll crack on with the presentation for now because I know we've got a great demo coming up as well. So keep the questions
Sure.
coming, everybody. Ideally, if you can put them into the Q&A bit rather than in the chat, that would be brilliant. And we will do our best to get to those questions when we can.
Sure. Okay. I'll keep on moving. Let's get to the value of Gen AI and what are the different KPIs or metrics which are getting used. So if you look at this slide, the typical metrics you'll find here are not actually very different from your general business metrics, and that's the beauty of this, right? So if you have to really measure the impact of Gen AI or the value of Gen AI, it has to impact the most important business metrics you are tracking. So the ideal way to think about this is what are those key performance indicators for the process area or whatever problem you're trying to solve. And it can't be everything, right? So there are always trade-offs, maybe those top 2, 3, 4 metrics which you really want to have an impact on. And then go backwards, right? So now how is Gen AI going to have an impact on these metrics? So that's your benefit part of it. And of course, there is a cost angle, right? So GenAI implementation has a number of costs involved, maybe infra or, that's in fact one of the biggest components. So you need to figure out your strategy for implementation. Like I said, on-prem implementations could be really costly. So for most enterprises, the way to go is, private cloud, public cloud. And then of course there are a number of costs involved. Let's say you're taking help of an advisor, so cost involved in advisory support or in implementation and even maintenance and support, right? So there are a number of costs involved, like in case of any other technology. But in case of Gen AI, especially if you are making a lot of upfront investments, it might take a bit of time to really recover those. So having a good sense of ROI and total cost of ownership can actually go a long way in finding out use cases which are good candidates or have high potential. And of course, like I said, there could be business metrics. For example, if customer experience is most important for you, you should be tracking how this is going to impact your CSAT. Or if increasing efficiency is more important, then of course typical metrics around cycle time or reducing operational costs or how soon can you go to market, right? So those are the most important.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'll move on to what we are seeing today, right? So now, in spite of all this hype and potential, right? So the current reality, or at least till recent past, has been that while it has promised a lot, it's not really lived up to that hype till now, right? So most of the experimentation and pilots which actually happened last year, a lot of them couldn't move past the POC stage. There was hardly like a 10 to 15% conversion rate, and that's why we see very limited number of these use cases in production today. We also had some research on the number of deals which are happening between enterprises and providers, and there also, while the number of deals was good, but very few of these deals were actually large deals. So GenAI was more like an enabler for transformation or productivity enhancement in a lot of existing work, but we didn't find a lot of GenAI specific deals. And that could happen, but at least that's the story so far. this is just an example, right? Even in some of these mature, so-called mature areas of customer experience management and application services, the adoption is still nascent if we look at the entire pilot to production scale, and even within sub-segments in these areas, right? So there is still a long way to go before the technology becomes pervasive in some of these areas, and there are others, right? So where it's actually poorer than this. What that also means is there is still a lot of potential and a lot of scope, right, to make a difference in these areas. So the entire space is still, very early stage. A lot of technology evolution and business landscape evolution is still to happen. So what are some of the challenges then, right? So why is this not happening? I think one important aspect, or the most important aspect, is there's still not a lot of clarity around what kind of ROI could you get. And one reason for that is today it is still used largely for existing use cases or improved productivity, but net new use cases or the net new use cases which are moving to production are low. So once that starts happening, I think some of this will start becoming more clear. And then there are those concerns which are more, I would say, technology related, like data privacy and security or explainability or hallucination, right? So again, these are getting sold gradually. There are solutions which are coming up. There are guardrails which I think most enterprises are building now. There are regulations which actually push you or give you a framework to actually meet, some of these challenges. So so things are changing, but at least these are the challenges which have been there till now. So now, what are enterprises doing to really tackle these challenges, right? So I would say one is, like I said, the regulations are helping, right? So it's important to really adhere to these regulations to really avoid penalties and all. So that's probably the foremost thing any enterprise should be worried about. And then, there are other aspects. ROI/TC analysis, we already talked about, how use case prioritization is important rather than you trying to apply it everywhere. That will not help. And then carefully choosing GenAI technology, including what kind of platforms are you using, and I mean later we'll see what kind of a platform is GALE and how does Kore enable some of this. But basically choose your GenAI platform carefully, and whatever is surrounding, like your large language models, or what kind of partners are you working with. There are techniques today to enhance accuracy and bias. I think that was also coming out as one of the big concerns in that poll which Kane conducted, right? So use of RAG or use of model fine tuning or some fairness algorithms, right? Which help address a lot of these. When it comes to guardrails, right, it's really important to build these into your solution design. I mean, many times, enterprises have already invested into, building something, and later they realize the guardrails are missing. So this has to be a part of solution design rather than an outcome. And lastly, talent, right? So talent is really becoming important to win this race. So it's a talent war. So any kind of upskilling for your employees, appropriate hiring, or even partnerships, right, to have multidisciplinary teams, which take GenAI forward. So I think that's very critical.
Brilliant. And is there anything else that we are missing on this presentation? I'm conscious we could definitely want to have a look at GALE, because it's an exciting new platform that I think addresses a lot of this kind of stuff. So is there anything we've missed?
Sure. No, I think this is the last one actually, which gives the future direction. I think I talked about a lot of these. One or maybe two areas I'll quickly touch upon is, going forward, we could also start seeing ultra personalization of GenAI, right? So we'll see GenAI, coming or getting integrated with, say, our smartphones and our wearables, right? So that's a big trend which could happen, and that's why the importance of fine-tune smaller language models, because they are resource efficient. The second big trend which is happening right now is agentic AI or AI agents, which actually, so GenAI was all about knowledge, right? So you're generating knowledge, you're generating content, but how to, make it, autonomous, how to, have a greater level of decision making and intelligence. That's what agentic AI is about, and that's going to be like the big trend for the next year or 2 years.
Brilliantly.
Yeah, I'll take a pause here, Kane, and like you said, I'm conscious of the time, and probably we'll get back to some of your questions later.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really, really good. I think it's interesting how some of the challenges that you alluded to there correspond to some of the challenges actually that people voted for in this in the poll earlier on. So it's definitely something that is definitely top of mind for people, certainly around data and security and accuracy and reliability. Murli, Vaibhav showed there a number of use cases, a number of challenges, accuracy, reliability, guardrails, all that kind of stuff being part of it. And I know that all of this kind of stuff is exactly what's been going into the creation of GALE in terms of facilitating more Gen AI first use cases, facilitating model fine tuning and hosting and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it's a good time to get into that. Maybe you can tell us a bit about GALE and how GALE can help these people who are joining us today solve some of those challenges that Vaibhav alluded to earlier.
Absolutely. Let me pull up my screens and let me talk about this. So broadly, I think I'll just kind of keep it quick, short intro to what we're building and kind of the history behind that. So obviously, we've been working with conversational AI and AI in general for a decade now, and we've started working on transformer models way before ChatGPT came in, but everybody knows that changed the world. So when, funnily, when ChatGPT came in, one of the things that we thought the next way forward is, by the way, you guys are able to see my screen, yeah?
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
So one way forward, we thought was to build a foundational model in specific verticals. And boy, was that a bad idea. Because just about a couple of months after we started thinking through that, Llama released and Llama Weights released, and suddenly we saw a significant spike in the open source models. And we realized that that was not a place we want to go invest in money and time in, and we wanted to stick to what we are good at, building platforms. But during that time, one of the things we started seeing was people started to build a lot of wrapper applications around models. That was quick and easy. You kind of integrate with what's available directly, bring that in, and create simple applications like summarization, content generation, etc. Now, this was great for experimentation. This was great for you to quickly test and see what the magic of LLMs were all about. But for you to take from these kind of quick experiments and wrapper applications to enterprise-ready, production-ready applications is a significantly heavy task. And if you kind of look at a typical enterprise end-to-end stack, you would have user journeys on one end where customers and users actually interact with you. Then you have different type of use cases. I mean, if you think about banking, you can have lending, KYC, risk management, etc. And user journeys kind of map onto these operational processes that you have within your enterprise. And you have your data sources behind the scenes with API gateways to data lakes, so on and so forth. You're very, very abstracted level of end-to-end stack, but that's what this is. What we are seeing as a trend is an intermediate layer coming into play here, where you have GenAI apps and agents kind of working alongside your data sources and alongside your operational processes to enhance the user journeys, whether it's employee experiences or customer experiences. And for you to build something like this, you can think about it as a very similar process that you would have gone through building any kind of application. You have an idea, you see what's happening in terms of the problem statement, then you continue to quickly experiment with that. Then you have to take from an experimental stage to build and serve to multiple users and probably thousands of users across the world. And finally, you have an enhanced experience either to your customers or to your employees. But unlike the traditional applications, there are a lot more different things that come into play when you think about GenAI. You may have to think about prompts. You may have to think about different kind of models that you have to bring in, because you will not really look at single model, and we don't think single model rules all. It's a combination of models that you'll actually have in play. You may have to think about guardrails. When you start thinking about enterprise data, you have to figure out how do you put the boundary conditions around that, and how do you ensure the models don't see what you don't want it to see, and it does not generate what you don't want it to generate. Then comes scaling. When it comes about scaling, it's about going from one user to thousands of users. When that happens, you have to start thinking about observability, evaluation of these models, and see what's happening really there in terms of the models, the apps, and the agents. So all of these different things come into play. And when we started thinking about this and started implementing that within our own organization, we realized that with the enterprises we work with, we really wanted to ensure that they focus on what matters the most, which is the value creation. And the value creation really happens in the idea and the experimentation stage. So we wanted to provide tools necessary for our customers to experiment quickly. But what we also wanted to do is automate everything that is required for you to go from an experimental stage to a full scale serving and production ready applications very, very quickly. And because these are the same, whether you're building one agent, one app, or multiple agents or multiple apps and serving thousands of users. So our focus was, based on our experience of building the platforms for the last decade, take all of that, make that ready for GenAI, and provide the tools necessary for them to experiment quickly. So very quickly, I'll touch upon what the stack looks like, and I'll show you a couple of demos. So it starts from the data. On top of that sits the connectors, because we want to enable connections to enterprise systems. Then, obviously, this is a GenAI platform. Everything starts with the foundational models. So we support pretty much all commercial models and community models. And one of the things we had learned from our experience of working with enterprises, every enterprise have their own systems and processes in play. So we wanted to make sure a product sits in that ecosystem and does not disrupt what they already have and work cohesively within that. So not only will we allow the community models we already have as a platform default support, but we enable customers to bring any model from Hugging Face if they want to, or as long as it's a transformer model. But we also go beyond that. If you already have played around with the model, if you have something within your enterprise, we enable you to directly connect to that model and bring that onto the platform. So we kind of make that pretty easy for the customers to live with whatever they currently have and extend with our platform. On top of that, we enable you to actually provide, create your own models. We believe over a period of time, while these large language models will have a significant role to play, there are going to be small language models that are going to come in with model distillation capabilities. You're going to use the capability of your enterprise data. You're also going to use the capability that these large language models have learned based on trillions of tokens that they've been trained on. And using a combination, you distill down a training data set for you to create your custom models. And you'd want to do that, obviously, for multiple reasons. One, for cost. Second, for the latency. Because if you start thinking about edge use cases where people want to have this on the go on their devices, you want to have a smaller and smaller models that can do specific tasks very, very well, and they can perform extremely well on that particular issues. So we provide the ability for you to do that. On top of that sits our agents. Now, Ethan agents, we have, traditionally, for people who don't know what core is, we've been building no-code platforms. And again, GALE is a no-code generative AI platform where you can drag and drop nodes. I'll show that in a second, how you can construct complex flows. Prompt engineering, ability for you to deploy, version control, all of that that's necessary for enterprise platform is already out there. But the most important piece is the entire aspect of ML and LLM ops, whether it's about scaling, security, observability, monitoring, etc., is part of the package. Now, GALE sits as a part of the core ecosystem, so it integrates very well with our XO platform, which is our conversational AI platform, and it also integrates very well with our Search AI, which is our RAG-based implementation product. And these are cohesively integrated, so you can take the best advantage of both of them. And then everything you build in GALE is exposed as REST APIs. You can pretty much build this, take a part of your existing process, automate that with GALE, and put them back right into your existing systems processes. And we also have certain solutions, so we can talk about that later. So briefly, let me talk about the key buckets which I showed there, and then we can see the demo itself. Prompt Studio, one of the things we've learned over a period of time. In fact, when we started GALE, this was the first thing we actually came up with. But we built this as a experiment for us, because we wanted to experiment with multiple prompts and multiple models for you to choose the prompts and the models appropriately. But then we realized that prompt itself is the spec of the modern applications. When you think about GenAI applications, the prompt is the real spec. So that means you have to have a good lifecycle management around that. Because what we saw and what is happening today is that people are embedding prompts directly into their applications. But we know the models are going to evolve, prompting techniques are going to evolve. And if you kind of embed them and make it deeply integrated with the applications, then you would have a significant challenge if you want to bring in a new concept. So what we wanted to do was provide an entire prompt lifecycle management around it. So you can have a central place where you can experiment with prompts, and then you publish them as APIs. Any application can consume them directly. And tomorrow, if you update a prompt, you'll have a new version. And that application that's consuming this can always say, give me the latest version. Or it can say, you know what, give me the version number 2. I will always only use that. So that the people who are thinking about how to write good prompts and how to choose the right models can actually focus on that, and applications can be completely independent of it. And we provide that entire capability, not only with centralized prompt management, your ability for you to test across various different models. And one of the things we've, again, as a challenge that we saw internally was when you're testing with prompts, you want data. And it's very difficult for you to get the right kind of data for you to test. So we provide the ability for you to generate synthetic data for testing, specifically based on the prompt itself. We identify what the prompt you have written and create a data set very specifically to that, so that you can actually apply that and test it across various different models, and also evaluate the output of these models. So how do you know? I mean, initially you can say, okay, this model response looks good, but you more want to test it across various different parameters. So we give you the ability for you to define the evaluation criteria and then evaluate these prompt responses.
Brilliant. You got a round of applause from somebody there on the emojis, which is great. And I definitely see the value of this, especially as you begin to scale and you have more people using this platform to build out solutions. You may have use cases that are different, but that have capabilities within them that are similar. So being able to access these prompts via API means you can reuse them from one central location in different applications that require them, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. And what we've realized is that, prompt techniques evolve, models evolve, and there are people who are trying to focus on building this. And we wanted to make sure that that separates out from actual building of an application, and so that you can track them with specialists who can manage this and the applications can consume. And to more, one of the things we've seen is, let's say, for example, summarization. An application A uses a summarization prompt. Application B uses the same prompt with a slight variation. You don't have to build two different prompts. Instead, you can have one with different versions each of these applications are consuming. Mm. And I think that is something that we realized working with various different customers over the last year. And we realized that we had to upgrade the prompt studio to make that happen.
Nice. Quick question from Adrian, very brief. The little box down there on the bottom left, which is evaluation. He says, what is the use of evaluation? So what's that doing there?
That's a perfect segue for my next slide. Let me get there. So one of the things we're trying to do right now is, obviously, when you start thinking about models, you want to ensure the models are, first of all, when you think about models, you have to think about testing at models and apply that to a very typical traditional software testing. You'd have unit testing, then you have regression testing and performance testing, so on and so forth. So the early part, when you use the prompt studio, you're kind of doing the unit testing of the prompt itself and the models. So with evaluation studio, you can define the criteria for evaluation. So for example, you can say, and by the way, we provide two different types of evaluation. One, an AI model evaluating an AI model, or a human evaluating an AI model. So when you do that, you can define saying that I want to make sure this model is always generating a JSON output, because that's what you prompted for. Since you prompted, that doesn't mean it actually will follow. You have to ensure that it actually is doing that, not only in the testing, but also when you put that in production over a long period of time, it is consistently following that. Or you can say, you know what, I want this model to be very cohesive and I want it to generate only about 10 words. I want to test the model to make sure it is only generating that. Or you can say, I don't want it to be generating stuff outside the context I've given. So there are a lot of different types of evaluation you can apply depending on the use cases you're applying the model to. And the evaluation studio provides that ability for you to define those evaluations and also use various different AI models to evaluate that. So for example, you may have a small fine-tuned model that you're using, but you can use GPT-4 or Anthropic Claude 3.5 to evaluate that particular small fine-tuned model. That is really, really helpful based on what we've seen. And the way this happens is we think that you can evaluate at various different stages. Early stage is basically using any kind of test data. In the production, you can say, extract out the production data every day, every month, every week, and automatically keep applying this evaluation to make sure that the model is not drifting from the original thought. So that is the power of the evaluation studio. It will continuously evaluate that. Or you can bring in an external data set. You can say, I have a data set that I've actually done somewhere. You can plug the data set here, and you can apply those evaluators again. So the way this works is that think about this as a complicated spreadsheet where every column is a different evaluator. It can be an AI-based evaluation, or it can be a human-based evaluation. And with the human-based evaluation, we provide the ability for you to kind of give you rating or give you comments. So what happens is if you fine-tuned a particular model, if that put in production, you can now see if it is actually performing. If it's not, you can provide the comments here and send that back to the fine-tuner and say, update the model with the new updates that I'm actually giving you. So that's the power of Evaluation Studio. Hopefully that answered the previous question.
Definitely. And I think this also gets at some of the challenges that we alluded to earlier on around reliability and risk and compliance and stuff like that. If you've got this in place and you can agree with your organization what your acceptance level is, and as long as you're, as you suggested, constantly pushing live data through it and constantly evaluating model performance against live data, as long as you're hitting that threshold, presumably you've got, you're within, you're being as compliant as the boards as you can be, and guarding as responsibly as you can, essentially, aren't you?
That's right. I mean, you need to be able to observe what's happening in the model, because the moment you start thinking about production ready applications, you're thinking about regulations, you're thinking about guardrails within your organization, you're thinking about compliance. So you need to be able to export this data out to give it them. So one part is obviously making sure it's working as it should. Second part is that people who have regulations and files issues will be able to take a look at these information and see exactly what's happening at every step of the way.
And presumably, either now or at some point in future, you will have the ability to trigger actions off the back of something happening. For example, if you say that you want your content correctness score to always be at least zero point 0.9, but then at some point one of them drops below zero point 0.9, you want to be able to trigger that. Trigger that to someone to say, "Hey, this has dropped below this threshold. You might want to have a look at it."
Yeah, so in fact, we do that today. So what we have, in fact, let me, given the time, I will jump to the demo, and then I'll come back to this and show you some concepts again. So first of all, very broadly, let me answer that question, Kane, and then I'll show the demo. One of the things we do is we enable applying guardrails directly into the agent flow. And when you apply a guardrail there, you can set a threshold. You can say, if this guardrail threshold, so guardrail gives you a risk score. If you say the risk score is above 0.5, then end the flow and get back with an error. So that what happens is then it'll wait, it'll look at the model response and decide what it has to do. And if it ends, the risk score exceeds a certain number, it'll end the flow and sends out an information back to the person who has to monitor that. So that's a very brief response to your question. We are right now managing that as part of guardrails that will continue to evolve with significant amount of evaluation capabilities. So anyway, broadly, this is a platform. I talked about Playground, which I just talked about, which is, by the way, we call the Prompt Studio Playground because, initially when we started thinking about that, we just wanted to play with it, but we realized there is a full lifecycle management around it. So it has become Prompt Studio today. The model is where you can configure your models. You can configure external models with very simple click. You can configure with easy integration, which gives you the ability to configure any commercial models, or custom integration, which can help you bring models you have hosted on your systems. Open source models, as I said, you can deploy any open source model that we've already enabled within the platform, or you can directly connect to Hugging Face, create a connection, and give a model name from Hugging Face, and we'll pull that directly into the platform for you to use it. Whenever you pull any model, you have to select the default parameters. So for example, you can, by the way, we also provide optimization techniques. So when you pull a particular model, if that model is huge, we can actually enable optimization techniques for you to deploy that model. Currently, we enable VLLM. We are working on various different optimization techniques as well as we go along. Then you provide the default parameter set. Now, every model you deploy will have a default set of hyperparameters, but you can change that at every instance. You use that if you want to, and then you choose the hardware you want to deploy. So I'll just skip that for time being. Then the most important part is the ability to fine tune. So we enable you to fine tune any of the models that we support or directly from Hugging Face. So you can choose the model. You can select the fine tuning configuration. We provide various different fine tuning types. QRoller is one we are working on right now. I've been enhancing this with other fine tuning abilities as well. Then you choose the data set. You provide the test data. You choose the hardware. We also provide integration with directly the weights and biases. So if that's the tool you use, the entire training data set is pushed to weights and biases for you to review. It's a simple step-by-step configuration process. And the key here is really to create the training data. And once you've done that, ability to fine-tune that on this platform is very, very easy. Here is the big boy. So when you go to agents, this is where you actually construct a complex workflow. So for example, let me pull out a particular example. I'll talk about what this example is. But before, an agent has two things. One, this is an enterprise platform. So that means we have account-based access. Every account is sandboxed. So whoever are the users within that account, they will have to be given permissions. So an individual company can have multiple accounts. Each account can have multiple users. And so each user can have permissions specifically for a given agent, given model, so on and so forth at various different levels. Again, keeping an enterprise in mind. So every agent has a development version and a deployed version if you have deployed it. So if you go to the development version, you'll see the flow. If you deploy, you have an endpoint, you have an API key, and you have the entire monitoring capabilities out here, and the guardrails that I was talking about, Kane, earlier, that you can deploy for a given particular agent. So I'll touch upon the guardrails very briefly. You have various different type of scanners you can configure. You can do a regex, you can ban topics, anonymization, toxicity, so on and so forth. And the number of scanners are continuing to grow significantly. Let me go to the flow itself. So this is a flow where we are working with one of the customers who have a historical data of agent customer conversations in an MP3 format. So what they wanted to do was extract out that particular MP3, do a transcription, summarize that, and extract out key insights from there, because they wanted to go back historically and see if there are any key insights with their customer conversation that can help them enhance their experience with the customers. So what happens here is with GALE flow, you'll have a start node and an end node. So you define the API contract by defining the input and output. In that particular example, the input is a field ID and the language. So essentially what we are, what's the input here is the name of the file that we have to extract and what is the language with which the file comes in. It can be an English language or a Spanish language. That was the options we had. And the output we send out is the transcription, the summary, the sentiment of that particular conversation, the intent, the topic, and any kind of errors we find alongside it. So once you have that, you have various different type of nodes here. Let me zoom in. We have a GenAI node, which is obvious. We have an API node that helps you connect with enterprise data. We have custom function node, where you can write a custom function for you to do something very quickly. We support both JavaScript and Python for you to write and test right there. This is the API node, which enables you to kind of fetch the data from various different APIs. I mean, this could be any API. It works very similar to the Postman experience that you can define the API. You can test the API right here to see if it's working. Then when it comes to conditions, so if there is this is if else logic. If you want to move a particular flow between various different type of logic, in this particular scenario, we are actually deciding what the type of language is, and based on that, we're doing different type of configuration. So for example, if it's English, we are just directly going to summarization. If it's Spanish, we're doing a translation first to English and then doing a summarization. This is the GenAI node. Now, GenAI node can use any of the models you have configured. You can see there are commercial models, there are fine-tuned models available, there are just bare, directly available open source models. So anything you would have configured in the models will be available for you to use. And then you do the hyperparameter setting here. So you would do the configuration of the hyperparameters initially when you deploy the model, but you can always do it at every instance.
And that's that bit there. Sorry, Murali, if you just go back into that node there where you've got the prompt and you've got context.transcription, that's pulling in a prompt from the prompt library. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this one actually, you have a prompt library that's different, but this one is different. What this is doing is it is that everything within GALE flow has a global context. So execution of every node and the output of that node is available in the context. So if you want to refer to something that happened in the previous nodes, you can use the context variable to define which variable you want to use from which node.
Right. So you're using the system prompt to tell it what you want it to do, and you're using that prompt to give it the context of what's gone on previously.
Yeah. And so it is dynamically constructing the prompt based on the input and the processing of the previous nodes so that it can actually process that.
Nice.
And then we have all of these nodes, and eventually you have the end node. This is where you actually define what the, we define the output API contract. Here you're saying which of the variables has to be to that particular which of the context information has to be mapped to that particular variable. So once you build all of this, you can quickly test it right here. This gives you a playground for testing. And whatever the input parameters you have defined, it gives you an opportunity for you to give in the test data. So here we have a wave file that's actually in AWS, and that's been hosted. This is a sample wave file, and it is in Spanish. So I'm giving this particular wave file. Because I've constructed this flow in such a way that it'll extract out from AWS directly, it'll look for this particular file and it understands the languages in Spanish. So when I run this, you will see the execution of every node and what's happening at each of the node. So it starts from the start node, then it is doing the language tagging. It's extracting that file from the AWS S3 bucket. Then it's doing a transcription. Then it's using the conditional logic. In this particular scenario, it was Spanish. So it's going to a translation, then the function, summarization, sentiment, all of that. Now you can go back every step and see what exactly happened. So in this particular scenario, okay, the language tabbing happened because that was API, the function node. You can actually see what exactly transcribed from the function node. Then if you go here, this is an API node. You can look at what was the payload that went in, what was the payload that actually came out, and you'll be able to see everything here. When it comes to GenAI nodes, so for example, this was a GenAI node. You can see exactly what was the prompt it actually constructed because the prompt was happening dynamically. What prompt it was constructed, what was the raw request that actually went in, raw response that actually came out, that you can dig deep into, and the output that is generated. This is very critical when you're trying to experiment and see how do you want to debug it. You'll also see what was the model used, how long did it take to complete, and how many tokens were consumed for that particular node execution. Now, every one of these obviously is available for you. And one of the things is when you, as I talked about saying that everything within the GALE is in the context variable. So this is the context variable that gives you the entire view of all the nodes. You have the context and every node execution is in the steps so that you can see the start node, language tagging node, data fetch node. Each one of them, you can actually look at exactly what happened in each of these particular node executions. So you'll be able to debug everything that's happening here so that the GALE, so the flow execution can work and you can go back and forth in here. And if you want to change anything here in terms of the input, you can give a new fresh input and it'll execute everything as it is. That was a significantly 50,000 feet view of the product and a whirlwind tour about exactly what's happening. There is so much here that I can't really do justice to it in the given amount of time. But I'm going to pause here because I spoke for a long time, but happy to take questions and see.
Thank you, Murli. I appreciate that. We've got some hands being raised. Like if I can just ask Alan, VJ, and Pazul to stick the questions in the chat, if you don't mind. We've got, or in the Q&A. We do have a few questions. There's still pretty much 75% of the people that joined at the beginning are still here, which is a really good effort. So thank you all for tuning in. That means that Vaibhav and Murli, the presentation's been engaging. So thank you very much. If everyone's game, and if you guys are game to hang for a little bit, then we can get to some of these questions if you like. I mean, there's 6 that we definitely should get to, and a couple more coming. So if everyone's good for 10 minutes, we can get through some of these questions if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah,
sure.
Okay, so Sangeeta asks, how does this technology, you kind of touched on it a little bit early, but maybe it's worth a bit of a deeper dive. So how does this technology integrate with existing systems, particularly insurance, such as policy management or claims processing systems, if you wanted to do something with that?
Yeah, so in fact, let me see if I can actually pull something up. So we actually worked as one of the examples. If I can find it, there you go. I don't know if this works because I may have the models undeployed, but we actually worked as an example for an auto claim insurance where, if you think about auto claim insurance, what happens is there's an accident and the customer sends an image saying this is what happened to my car. And then there is an adjudicator who's sitting and making a comparison between the damage image and the insurance policy image, and then deciding if they have to do a straight through processing of that or have to go through investigation, so on and so forth. So what we did this for is basically we used the vision model to kind of determine for a given image what the damage is, and based on the damage, determine what the cost of that particular claim could be. So what this particular flow does is it actually takes a particular image, and this is obviously dummy data. I can't really show you any client data, but the dummy data takes the particular clone image and then identifies. So for example, this is the image, So it takes this particular image, does a analysis on that in the vision, then goes back, looks at various different type of parts damage. Let me actually run this. No, this model is undeployed. Sorry, I was real time. But it would actually go do the analysis of the image and then extract out that piece of information, compare them against the kind of damage. So what it will do is identify what are the different parts of the damages in the car based on the image analysis, goes back, looks at all the different parts and the cost of replacing that part, and comes back with an estimate of saying how much this particular replacement would cost. And then it sends that to the adjudicator and say, this is what my initial analysis is. You decide what you want to do next.
Wow.
So we think there is a significant amount of opportunity, especially in the insurance claims processing, for bringing in these different kind of models to make it work.
What about the specific part about integrating that into a claims type of system? Let's say, for example, you have that. Is there a way in here in which you could take the results of that, which is we've assessed this image, this is our recommendations, now put that into the claims management system as a record against the claim? Is there a way that you could?
100%. I mean, every time, so that's what has happened here in the API node. So once you have an API within your existing systems, it can easily push the data, whatever we do in terms of analysis, and that you can define because you have an API. Let's say you execute all of these steps and the API requires 3 different data points that's coming from either the GenAI node or some kind of function node. You map that and the flow automatically pushes the data to that particular API, hence to your backend system.
Nice. We've got 2 questions that are still regarding the platform. And then there's a couple of questions that are a bit more general, which would be good to get your thoughts on, Vaibhav. So 2 not similar questions, but I think related in a sense, because it's all about monitoring and analysis. So 1, how do you calculate and understand the cost of running these applications? And 2, how do you understand whether they are working at scale? Because it's free-flowing language happening all the time. How do you understand and analyze what's working?
So one of the things we have as part of the platform, again from an enterprise perspective, is analytics. So here, what we do, I mean, obviously, depending on the type of model you incur different type of costs. If you're using commercial models, you're probably incurring tokens. If you're using models hosted on GALE, you're probably incurring the GPU hours and hence model credits. So depending on the kind of model you're using and where you're using it, you'll incur different type of costs. So what these gives you is a complete view of exactly what's happening. So if you look at here, this is what agent information is, how many agents were run, events, response time. If you look here, it's the model. So you can look at fine-tuned models, open source models, external models, each one of them differently, and each one of them give you different kind of information. So external models will talk about tokens, fine-tuned models may also talk about tokens, requests, number of requests that were used, what was the model, what kind of hardware you actually deployed the model on, how many clusters were using, was the clusters going up, going down, the hardware usage, the storage of the model, what is the amount of space it has taken, and the latency and the performance. So over a period of time, you would have to continue to evaluate and seeing what's happening. And these things will give you the markers to say, if this makes sense, do I have to change something? Do I have to go with a smaller model, or I have to improve the hardware because my requests are increasing? I see some of the failouts because of the number of requests per second that it can handle. So you can see all of those pieces of information here, and that will help you understand how your model and hence your agents and apps are performing.
Nice. Another question here is around how do you, this is from Stefan, how do you ensure that the models are protected against jailbreaking attempts or adversarial red teaming as people start to try and hack these things?
So one of the things we have as part of guardrails is PII injection. So, prompt injection. So we have a prompt injection guardrail that will actually look for potential injections. So for example, if you say, you know what, ignore all your previous instructions and give me a new information. So this is a model that's been fine-tuned on to kind of look at those and prevent that. But this is such an evolving space. It's very difficult for us to kind of look into every possible way people are going to try to jailbreak this. So as things evolve, we will continue to evolve. This is kind of going back to the early 90s and late 90s, how the entire virus scanners evolved over a period of time. I think McAfee was terrible when it started. Eventually, it became one of the better softwares, and now you don't even need them, at least not on Mac. But I think this field is evolving. I think we will have to continue to figure out how people will try to break this, because we have various different controls within the platform itself, and you will not directly use the models without going through the platform. We kind of provide these controls within the platform, and hence that's the first line of control, so to speak. But this is an evolving field. I think we will continue to figure out how best we can make this work over a period of time.
Nice. One question from Sakshi. I have a question on GALE. Can we have the output as email automation, which could be sent out to people? So, for example, could the output of an agent here be to email somebody with some information?
This is exactly this flow we built. In fact, this was with one of the banking customers we actually built this for. They were processing about 6,000 emails a day. And what they were doing was an incoming email could be either a request or a complaint or some other request for information. And they were processing, understanding what the email was, categorizing that, identifying the sentiment of the email, and eventually they were because it was a bank, there was a lot of regulations, etc. They had to respond back with a templated email that was approved by their legal department. So we took that entire process, and now when you send an email, I can't run this because I've undeployed the models here, but let's say I'll attempt to run it. And for example, here you have a bunch of email as a test criteria. Now, if you send this email, and if you say which one, who you want to send the output to, this entire flow goes through this particular email, understands and categorizes this email, figures out what this next best action it should take, and most importantly, came to the point you were talking about of sending the information back to the systems. This actually creates a ticket in their ticketing system saying there is a customer request that's come in. This is a request that you have to handle. It creates a ticket. Then based on certain business rules, it extracts out the entity and the sentiment. And then it generates, well, it doesn't generate, but it actually picks an email template based on the response and the email content that it is figured out, and the type of the email and the category and the subcategory of the email, and fills that template with the information and sends that back to the customer.
Wow.
So all of this is happening in this. And imagine 6,000 emails, 8 to 10 minutes per email, and this was getting done in about 30 seconds.
That's powerful. I mean, the older sort of traditional machine learning models to do this kind of stuff was very laborious and in fact impossible, because emails can be very long-winded. They've all got different structures and formats, and automating emails has always been a real challenge, whereas this is a perfect use of generative AI, isn't it? To take a big bit of text, extract the details from it, understand what it's about, get it to the right place, and there you go. That's brilliant.
And we have a couple of use cases where we worked on human in the loop as well. So if you don't want it to be, I mean, in this scenario, we were using a templated email. It was not generating a brand new content. We also have examples where, for example, there is an approval that's necessary. And because they were using our ITSS product, we were sending the approval directly to the ITSS product, and the entire flow would pause until they approve. And when they approve, the rest of the flow execution would complete. So that, you can actually configure this flow to execute based on a certain approval from somebody who has to go through it and figure out what needs to happen.
So you can also initiate or resume a process via an API.
That's right.
Nice.
Sync and async calls, and actually a callback request that they can do. So they can go do whatever that's necessary. And then once they call back the callback URL with the new data, it will continue the rest of the flow.
Love it. Brilliant. That's fantastic. We do have one or two questions, which maybe Vaibhav you can help us with. Jesse's asking, what do you envision whether there's any use cases that will span across all industries? For example, Teams and Slack and Zoom, doesn't matter what industry you work in, this applies and you can use that technology. Are there any GenAI use cases that you see that are like that?
Yeah, in fact, there are many horizontal, use cases which will span across industries. In fact, I think some of them I talked about. But for example, anything to do with, providing personalized recommendations, right? So that could be applicable across industries. For example, if you talk about, say, marketing, right, for any industry, right? So that's the place where you could use those recommendations. If you talk about, if you're a retail company, and I think I have one example, right? Macy is one of the retail companies who actually uses a lot of this, right? So it's an apparel provider, very famous in the US. So that's a retail provider who uses these personalized recommendations. And then there would be companies in other industries, right, who will be similarly doing that. And again, even when it comes to a lot of other use cases, say around technology development or software development, it again applies across industries.
Yeah, and that email use case you just showed there, actually, Murli, that's probably
Yeah,
something that's applicable.
yeah.
Summarization, brilliant use of the technology. Everyone needs to summarize phone calls, emails, tickets, all kinds of stuff like that is something that can
Yes.
apply across.
And in fact, in that particular use case, we actually created a custom model to do a right kind of summarization for the banking context. So we distilled that model based on the banking data, figured out how need to summarize based on how they want it, and it was actually pretty good in terms of what the output we generated.
Another one which comes to mind is, extracting information from documents, right? Which we are not really coding for. They are all unstructured information, maybe say contracts or financial statements or any other kind of a document, right? So you can use GenAI to extract information from any sort of document.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, listen, this has been absolutely amazing. We've still got more than half of the people who were here at the beginning still tuned in now, and we've been going for nearly an hour and a half. So it's a testament to the quality of the content. So, Vaibhav, I appreciate you walking us through that landscape assessment and what's hot and what's not, and what the challenges are and what the use cases are. And Murli, definitely, GALE looks absolutely impressive. I think that what's interesting about GALE, as I've said many times for those that tune in often, is that it gives you the ability to do things that you wouldn't have previously imagined, which is that email use case, very challenging, always challenging. Call summarization, again, it's one of those things that a lot of CCaaS vendors have attempted and have got kind of these use cases in there. But I think that having an application that you can use for all of your AI applications and being able to bring in all these different types of models and being able to fine tune them at the same time on your data and being able to manage your prompts and scale that across different use cases and then creating use cases, as I said, that you couldn't previously imagine. One of the ones that we spoke about previously is what I want to do when I get my hands on GALE finally is take podcasts and webinars like this, run the audio through it, have it transcribed, pick out the key themes, write an article based on those key themes, write the titles, write the meta descriptions, generate me an image that matches, push it into the CRM and just send it over to someone for approval. And if we can get to a place where we can publish within 30 minutes of recording, that will be days worth of effort saved.
Point taken.
Yeah. So there you go. So thank you guys very much. It's been really, really fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for being engaged, for doing the polls, for commenting, for questioning. And it's been really, really exciting. Hopefully this has been as exciting for you as it has been for me. The recording of this will be sent out tomorrow. If you guys are happy to share your presentations, we'll also send those out. And definitely, if you are also interested in learning more about GALE, which many of you, a few people have commented on already, then if you would like a demo, I'm going to launch this quick poll, final poll. If you would like a demo of GALE for your organization, just vote on this poll right here, and we'll pass your details on to the team, and they'll be in touch to arrange something that's more specific for you and your organization and your use cases. And we will do that. We'll do that tomorrow. So I'll leave that poll open for a little while. Thank you guys again. Any final points and final takeaways before we sign off?
No, first of all, thank you, Ken, for hosting, and thank you, everybody. I know this went longer than we expected. Appreciate you guys sticking around. This was a very useful conversation. Thanks for hosting us, Ken.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you as well, Vaibhav. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We'll see you on the next one coming up very soon, I imagine. So stay tuned. Thank you very much. Cheers all. Bye now.